Welcome to this introductory webinar on the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships curriculum. El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships is a curriculum designed to improve adolescent relationships, both in person and through social media, and to address bullying among youth. This program was designed and piloted with youth in DC middle schools, grades 6 through 8th, to help students develop knowledge, attitudes, skills, and behaviors that support their ability to make decisions that foster healthy relationships with peers, parents, family, and partners. The curriculum focuses on decision-making and personal values and includes lessons and activities on coping with strong emotions, teen brain development, empathy, assertive communication, and boundary setting. This program is intended to be implemented in youth-serving agencies, including schools, youth groups, and out-of-school time programs. In September 2017, the DC Office of Human Rights, which oversees the citywide bullying prevention program, partnered with Child Trends to adapt an existing evidence-informed curriculum called El Camino for use with DC middle school youth to improve healthy relationship skills and prevent bullying and other forms of interpersonal conflict. This work was funded by DC Health in fulfillment of its commitment under grant funding from the Title V Maternal and Child Health Services Block Grant Program to address bullying among DC youth. The original El Camino curriculum is a comprehensive, goal-setting teen pregnancy prevention program developed by Child Trends, with an aim to reduce teen childbearing and increase educational achievement among adolescents, particularly Latino youth. To adapt this curriculum to support middle school youth in developing healthy relationships, Child Trends engaged in a rigorous development and testing process. From 2017 to 2020, Child Trends developed El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships, through a series of focus groups. We spoke with DC educators, parents, and high school students who could reflect on their own middle school experiences to understand the challenges youth face related to healthy relationships and what they wanted youth to learn from a new curriculum. Participants viewed social media as a particular challenge when it comes to developing healthy relationships. They identified middle school, particularly 7th grade, as a period of heightened identity development for youth without much scaffolding. Combined with another common theme, that youth this age lack effective decision-making skills, participants generally felt that social media and technology use sometimes leads to heightened drama, conflict, and bullying among teens. After conducting a brief scan of the literature to identify existing programs and practices focused on developing healthy relationships for youth, Child Trends developed the curriculum from insights gleaned from the focus groups and aligned to DC curricular health standards. We piloted the curriculum in 5 DC classrooms with primarily Black and Hispanic students, ages 11 to 15. The final curriculum is a result of continuous quality improvement across this time and incorporates feedback from DC teachers and school administrative leadership, student focus groups and surveys, classroom observations, and facilitator debriefs.
The overall goal of El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships, is to help middle school-aged youth build the skills to create healthy relationships, both in person and online. To support this goal, El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships, has 4 programmatic key messages for youth participants. 1. Know yourself inside and out by identifying your driving values, or what you stand for and what makes you your best self. 2. Use a decision-making tool called STAR, S-T-A-R, which stands for Stop, Think, Act on your values, Reflect. This will help you to make good decisions that are in line with the values that drive you. 3. Understand how your relationships with friends, peers, and family influence the direction of your life path. 4. Practice skills that help you avoid and deal with challenges that can get in the way of developing healthy relationships. The El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships curriculum, is built on 3 core components, which are essential to the success of the program. First, the curriculum is youth-driven, meaning that teachers do not tell the youth what to think, believe, or do, and teachers do not use their personal opinions to sway students. It is important that students have the opportunity to express their ideas, opinions, and experiences. Second, teachers use a positive, strengths-based orientation and focus on skills. They help youth focus on what to do instead of what not to do. Finally, participating youth identify their own personal values and consider how these values influence their decisions. There are several unique features of the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships curriculum. The curriculum is anchored in a strengths-based approach to youth learning. It was developed out of a need for a new approach to bullying prevention and to help youth navigate interpersonal conflict both in person and on social media. However, rather than adopt a discipline-oriented lens that may patronize or alienate youth, the curriculum adopts a positive frame to relationship building that respects teens' ability to think and do things independently. The curriculum incorporates a decision-making framework called STAR, which again stands for Stop, Think, Act on Your Values, Reflect, to support youth in making decisions based on their personal values. Youth have ample opportunity to apply the STAR framework throughout the lessons of the curriculum as they reflect on their own personal values and life experiences, and how STAR might help them decide how to approach tricky situations with their peers. The curriculum introduces key concepts and fosters discussion through a series of novellas that feature a group of characters who are middle school teens. These characters and their experiences are used throughout the curriculum to provide a means for youth to talk about real-life issues and relationship challenges that they may face. Finally, the curriculum is designed with a focus on the needs and cultural context of DC youth. The curriculum development was informed by focus groups with DC educators, parents, and high school students who provided anecdotes of youth's experiences with technology and social media, interpersonal conflicts, trauma, and bullying. The curriculum is reflective of teens' reality today, where youth may take on an online persona and an in-person persona, and where social media provides tools for both positive and negative interactions with peers. Although the curriculum is built specifically aligned to Washington, D.C.'s curricular standards and to reflect D.C.'s student population, we hope other communities will adopt and adapt the curriculum. If you are interested in doing so, please let us know.
Curriculum materials for El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships, are available for download in English on childtrends.org. Materials include a front matter package that provides background information on the curriculum's core components, unique features, goals, scope and sequence, key teaching methods, and lesson structure. The front matter also contains a self-assessment of key teacher competencies, facilitation suggestions, background resources, and a fidelity monitoring tool. The Lesson Plans package contains lesson plans for each of the curriculum's 10 lessons, and an appendix of student handouts and printed materials. A Facilitator PowerPoint slide deck is designed for curriculum facilitators to use alongside the lesson plans, and may be modified to suit the needs of their students. The training manual equips staff in educational institutions and out-of-school time programs to deliver a training workshop for curriculum facilitators who will implement El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships. And finally, the training workshop PowerPoint slide deck was designed for training workshop facilitators to use alongside the training manual and may be modified to suit the needs of their institution.
Now that we've reviewed the key components of the curriculum and the materials available to support implementation of the curriculum, we'll share a brief overview of each individual lesson to help you understand the intention behind the lesson, highlight important teacher's notes, and share insights from the educators who helped us pilot the curriculum. First, let's take a look at how lessons are organized and where you can find key information. El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships lesson plans follow a consistent format. The lessons are divided into two main components, lesson overviews and procedures. The first page of each lesson contains the lesson overview. The lesson overview page is designed to help you plan and organize for the lesson prior to class. At the top of each lesson in El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships, you will find the number of the lesson, 1 through 10, and title of the lesson. Following the lesson title, you will find a brief lesson synopsis summarizing the lesson, the specific key messages and learning objectives for that lesson, and any DC health standards for grades 6 through 8 to which the lesson aligns. In the right-hand column, you'll find a list of materials needed for the lesson, including specific teacher resources and student handouts, which can be found in the appendix at the end of the lesson plans package. Below the materials list, the Lesson at a Glance section provides a list of the major activities in the lesson and associated time estimates. El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships lessons are timed at 60 minutes, but you may instead choose to cover each lesson in two 30-minute sessions. In our example here, you can see that the lesson activities have been separated into Lesson 1.1 and Lesson 1.2 for facilitators implementing the 30-minute sessions. The Procedures section provides step-by-step instructions on how to facilitate each of the activities in El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships lessons, and the estimated time it will take to facilitate each activity. The Procedures section provides language that the teacher can use to describe activities, give mini lectures, and ask discussion questions. Teachers can follow this language verbatim or put it in their own words, as long as the essence of the instruction is not changed. Common components of every lesson include a welcome, review, and lesson overview. The start of each lesson reminds students of key takeaways from earlier lessons and introduces the topic of the current lesson. Group agreements and key messages. Group agreements set expectations of the participants by listing acceptable or unacceptable behaviors that all participants agree on. Facilitators should remind students of group agreements at the start of every lesson and read the key messages together. Exit tickets. At the end of each lesson, students will receive an exit ticket. Exit tickets encourage students to reflect on the lesson through a range of short activities. Throughout each lesson in El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships, you will find shaded boxes with teacher's notes. Yellow text boxes provide teachers with examples, additional language to facilitate an extended discussion, or suggested adaptations based on the grade they are teaching within the grade band. Green text boxes provide teachers with tips on how to facilitate a particular activity, background information, and/or advice on how to avoid potential pitfalls in facilitating the activity. Each activity includes a list of materials required, including specific teacher resources and student handouts. This content is generally incorporated into the lesson procedures for teachers to reference. The corresponding resources for each activity are also listed under the Lesson at a Glance in the Lesson Overview section. See the appendix, Student Handouts and Materials package at the end of the Lesson Plans package, and the Facilitator PowerPoint slide deck for additional materials needed to implement the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships curriculum.
In Lesson 1, students will learn about the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships program. They will be introduced to the model of life as a road and to the concept of personal values as something that drives us to be our best selves. They will begin to identify the personal values that are most important to them and consider whether their actions reflect those values. First, facilitators welcome students to the program and tell students about the goals of the program. Then, students are introduced to the group agreements, and read the key message for Lesson 1. After that, students will be introduced to the concept of values and complete the What Are Values activity to learn about some specific values and match them with their definitions. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 1.1 will conclude with an exit ticket, asking students to share what they find confusing about values or what they would like to know more about. Lesson 1.2 will begin with a quick review of the group agreements and the key message for Lesson 1. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Facilitators will lead a Vote with Your Feet activity, where students get up and move around the room to an area that corresponds with a set of statements they might agree or disagree with. Students will then sort their values into 3 groups: very important to me, somewhat important to me, and not important to me. Finally, as an exit ticket, students will reflect on the values they identified as very important to me. We begin El Camino, the road to healthy relationships, with a discussion of personal values because it is important for youth to know themselves, inside and out, before thinking about their relationships with others. Identifying their driving values, what they stand for, and what makes them their best selves can help youth begin to answer the question, who am I? When facilitating this lesson, it is important that teachers do not tell youth what to think, believe, or do, and teachers should not use their own personal values or opinions to sway students. It's important that youth have the opportunity to express their ideas, opinions, and experiences. We included a limited number of values in the lesson plans, so youth would not feel overwhelmed by a large number of words and definitions. However, we also included space for students to add their own values if they are not already listed. It is important not to describe a value as good or bad, or positive or negative. We also don't want youth to think that the values they have chosen as important to them are right or wrong, based on the values their family or friends might feel are important. You may wish to talk about the different ways a certain value can be perceived. For example, power might be perceived as a negative because it could be used to exert undue influence over others. However, it could also allow someone to help another person when they otherwise could not. Finally, it might be helpful to remind youth that their values may change as they grow older, or even during their participation in El Camino, and that's okay.
In Lesson 2, students will continue learning about values and thinking about how to demonstrate the values that are important to them. A major focus of this lesson will be examining how students portray themselves to others online and reflecting on how their personal values might influence their online behavior. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program and read the key message for Lesson 2. Then, students will identify one of the values that is important to them and draw what the value makes them think or feel. After that, students will read Novella Chapter 1, which will introduce them to the story characters. Students will work in small groups to complete the character's value chart for an assigned character. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 2.1 will conclude with an exit ticket, asking students to identify one thing about themselves that their friends know and another that friends do not know about them. Lesson 2.2 will begin with a quick review of the concept of values and the key message for Lesson 2. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students are introduced to the concept of identity and proceed to read Novella Chapter 2. Students will then complete an identity profile by drawing or writing 3 things they would post on their social media profile to communicate their identity to the world. Finally, as an exit ticket, students will identify one thing they might share online that demonstrated their identity or personal value, and one thing that they want to either stop sharing or viewing online. In this lesson, students are introduced to a group of young people in the context of a novella or story. These characters and their experiences, including their interactions over text, social media, and video game chats, are used throughout the curriculum to provide a means for students to talk about issues and challenges that they may face in real life, and to practice communication skills through role plays. The novellas also provide examples of characters using skills such as empathetic listening, assertive communication, and boundary setting to support youth who may not have had the personal experience or a real-life example to have practiced these skills themselves or seen them used. Lesson 2 continues to ask youth to reflect internally on who am I, and identifying their driving values, what they stand for, and what makes them their best selves. This lesson reflects that youth may take on an online persona and an in-person persona, and that social media provides tools for both positive and negative interactions with peers. We wanted to create a space for discussion about why we might act differently when we're with different people, hide or reveal certain things about ourselves, or say things online that we might not say in person. Facilitators should help students consider the similarities and differences between identity and values. For example, one of our pilot educators shared with the students, we might both identify as Black and male, but we might have different values. If time allows, you may wish to help students think about what they are sharing online and consider what the consequences may be of sharing certain kinds of information. This conversation could help students practice safe social networking and positive digital citizenship, as well as protect their privacy. However, be sensitive to what students may share when deciding to extend this discussion. It may bring up triggering scenarios or drama between classmates.
In Lesson 3, students will be introduced to a decision-making tool called STAR, which stands for Stop, Think, Act on Your Values, and Reflect. Students will practice considering choices and potential consequences, both good and bad, potential influences on their decisions, opportunities to ask for help or advice, and how their decision could impact others. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program and read the key message for Lesson 3. Then, students are introduced to the STAR decision-making tool and walk through each step. Stop, think, act on your values, reflect. After that, students will work in small groups to complete the STAR activity. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 3.1 will conclude by asking students to practice using the STAR decision-making tool. Lesson 3.2 will begin with a quick review of the STAR decision-making tool and the key message for Lesson 3. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students will read Novella Chapter 3, in which one of the characters is facing a decision. You will lead a discussion to help students think through what the character should do. Finally, as an exit ticket, students will identify one thing they find most difficult when making a decision, and one thing they find most helpful when making a decision. In developing this curriculum, we heard from DC educators that middle school-aged youth do not yet have the executive function to know how to make carefully thought-out decisions. They'd experienced their students acting impulsively, getting in a fight, causing a scene, or ranting on social media in response to something that provoked them, and then regretting those choices later when they were calm. These impulsive choices frequently impacted youth friendships and relationships with peers, or left a negative social media footprint. Educators said their students needed support to process, what is the decision that I have to make? What are my options? What factors are influencing why I'm making this particular decision? And what are the potential consequences of my actions? Students also needed the opportunity to practice decision-making in a safe space. In response to these insights, we developed the STAR decision-making tool to help students stop, think, act on their values, and reflect. We built in opportunities for students to practice using this tool in response to real-life scenarios throughout the curriculum.
In Lesson 4, students will learn about the physiological signs of stress and how noticing when they feel stressed can help them stop and think about the situation they are in. Students will brainstorm different strategies they can use when experiencing stress. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program, review the STAR decision-making tool, and read the key message for Lesson 4. Then, students participate in a breathing exercise to help them slow down their thoughts and practice noticing how they feel. After that, facilitators lead the stress responses activity. Students will complete this activity in a small group and then individually. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 4.1 will conclude without an exit ticket. Lesson 4.2 will begin with a quick review of stress responses and the key message for Lesson 4. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Facilitators will help students identify and discuss stopping strategies to use when experiencing stress. Then, students will split into 2 groups to complete the reacting online versus in-person activity, where they will reflect on how they would react and feel in a given situation. Students will read Novella Chapter 4 and discuss how the characters are feeling and reacting. Finally, students will be asked to practice noticing their stress responses and using stopping strategies before reacting for the next class. The first step of our decision-making tool is stop. This is also likely the most difficult step for teens. Often, they make snap decisions without even realizing they're doing so. We'll ask, "Why did you do that?" And they'll tell us, "I don't know." And they really don't know. We wanted to give youth some tools to help them recognize that a decision needs to be made, and some strategies to give themselves the time and space to do so. Feeling emotions in the body may be a familiar concept for someone with a meditation or mindfulness practice. Often, adults talk about carrying stress in our shoulders or getting a tension headache. These are physical reactions to stress. Youth may also experience these physical responses to emotion, but not connect those responses to the larger context. This lesson helps students practice recognizing physical responses to emotions as a signal that they need to stop before making a decision. The lesson starts out with a breathing exercise that walks youth through a body scan to practice noticing your breath. This is a common mindfulness practice to calm the mind and tune into the body, but it may feel a little silly to youth who have not done it before. Approach the exercise seriously and ask students to give it a try. One of our pilot instructors even asked the student to lead the breathing exercise. The student took the task seriously, so his classmates did too.
In Lesson 5, students will learn about aspects of brain development that influence decision-making, practice identifying emotions, and evaluate a range of coping strategies. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program and read the key message for Lesson 5. Then, facilitators and students will review the stop strategies discussed in Lesson 4. After that, students will watch a short video on the teen brain and discuss key messages from the video. Facilitators will help students discuss emotions and then divide the class into small groups. Each group will be assigned an emotion to examine more in depth and act out through a short skit or mime. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 5.1 will conclude with an exit ticket, where students will identify an emotion that they have a hard time managing and could use one of the stopping strategies next time they experience it. Lesson 5.2 will begin with a quick review of emotions and the key message for Lesson 5. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students will complete the How Would You Feel gallery walk activity, walking towards a sign with the emotion that best describes how they would feel in a given situation. Next, students will read Novella Chapter 5 and discuss the emotions the characters may be feeling. Finally, students will be asked to complete one of 2 tasks related to the STAR decision-making tool and emotions for the next class. We included this lesson on emotions and teen brain development because they play a huge role in youth's decision-making abilities. While we're on the subject of brain science, reassure your students that this is not a science class. They won't need to come away from this lesson being able to spell amygdala or knowing the definition of prefrontal cortex. Rather, it's important for them to know that the teenage brain is still developing and won't be fully developed until they reach about 25 years of age. There are many positive takeaways from this, including that teens are very good at learning and developing new skills. It also means that some parts of their brain are more developed than others. For instance, the part of the brain responsible for decision making is still developing, so teens are more likely to make impulsive decisions. On the other hand, part of the brain responsible for emotions is already fully developed, so teens rely on this part of their brain much more than adults do. Because of this, teens feel emotions much more strongly than adults do. We can normalize that teens are feeling all the emotions and feeling them strongly, and that's okay. This lesson will help youth begin to identify different emotions and how to cope with them.
In Lesson 6, students will learn what empathy means, discuss behaviors that can demonstrate empathetic listening, and practice being empathetic with their peers. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program, review the stop and think steps in the STAR decision-making tool, and read the key message for Lesson 6. Then, students are introduced to the concept of empathy. After that, students will complete the activity, Take Your Pulse, Am I Empathetic?, to identify how often they act in empathetic ways. Students will read Novella Chapter 6, Part 1, and discuss how the characters show empathy for each other. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 6.1 will conclude with an exit ticket, asking students to reflect on how using empathy could change their interactions with other people. Lesson 6.2 will begin with a quick review of empathy and the key message for Lesson 6. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students will read Novella Chapter 6, Part 2, and discuss how the characters show empathy for each other. Next, students will work in pairs to practice being empathetic in a given situation. Finally, as an exit ticket, students will reflect on how being empathetic could help them use the STAR decision-making tool. Lesson 6 begins the shift from reflecting internally on who am I to focusing externally on how they interact with others. We begin with empathy because it can be frustrating to know ourselves and our values, but to have others misunderstand us. Empathy is an important communication tool for understanding others. Youth will have the opportunity to learn simple behaviors, to listen and communicate empathetically, discuss empathy in using examples in the novella, and practice empathetic listening and communication through a role-play activity. That being said, empathy is a difficult concept, especially for younger students. It may be helpful to consider additional ways to help students define empathy. Facilitators might try using a Y chart or a T chart, two types of graphic organizers, to compare aspects of empathy. A Y chart is a type of three-part chart that can be used to help organize what is known about a topic. For example, youth could describe empathy by describing examples of what it looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. A T-chart is a type of two-part chart to compare aspects of a topic. For example, youth could compare examples of what empathy is and what it is not.
In Lesson 7, students will learn about assertive communication and practice using assertive communication skills to communicate important information. They will consider how assertive communication demonstrates respect for another person and why it's a key part of healthy relationships. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program, review the stop, think, and act steps in the STAR decision-making tool, and read the key message for Lesson 7. Then, students are introduced to assertive communication. After that, students will be assigned one of two scenes in Novella Chapter 7 and work with a partner to determine how the characters could respond assertively. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 7.1 will conclude with an exit ticket, asking students to identify an assertive communication technique they want to use more, or one situation where they could have used assertive communication. Lesson 7.2 will begin with a quick review of assertive communication and the key message for Lesson 7. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students will work in pairs to complete the role play and discussion activity, where they will create a script for a given scenario and practice using assertive communication. finally, students will reflect on a few questions regarding assertive communication. In an age where so much communication between teens is happening through social media, chat rooms, or texting, we wanted to include a lesson explicitly teaching youth how to communicate assertively. While developing the curriculum, educators shared, "I think social media keeps this age group in a bubble. When we were growing up, we had to be able to take things face to face, but now it's just like, I'm going to blast you on social media," and they end up retreating and never really getting to come full circle on an issue. We heard a need to help youth navigate interpersonal conflict through conversation, even if that conversation is happening via technology. This lesson gives youth easy techniques to communicate assertively and a chance to practice using role-play activities. During our curriculum pilot, students were very honest about how they would instinctively respond to a tricky situation with peers, but it took more thought to use their assertive communication skills. Youth might benefit from guiding questions such as, "Here's where this person might be coming from. Remember that you want to remain friends with this person. Would you still say that? How could you say this without hurting someone's feelings?" If time permits, older youth might benefit from an extended discussion on other communication styles, including aggressive, passive, and passive-aggressive communication.
In Lesson 8, students will learn about personal boundaries and boundaries in relationships. They will discuss and identify examples of boundaries being crossed and practice navigating these situations by assertively communicating their boundaries. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program, review the STAR decision-making tool and assertive communication, and read the key message for Lesson 8. Then, students are introduced to the concept of boundaries. After that, students will read Novella Chapter 8 and discuss any boundaries that the characters had to set. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 8.1 will conclude with an exit ticket asking students to think of a boundary they might need to set in their lives. Lesson 8.2 will begin with a quick review of boundaries and the key message for Lesson 8. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students will watch a video where the character has to decide whether or not to set a boundary. Students will then work in pairs to create a skit based on the video they just watched and practice setting boundaries. Finally, students will reflect on the way they might feel before and after setting a boundary. Every educator and parent we spoke to while developing the curriculum shared that youth need help understanding and setting healthy boundaries. They shared example after example of teens navigating new friendships or intimate relationships and finding themselves in uncomfortable and even dangerous situations. The teens in these situations felt they were in control, until suddenly they weren't. In particular, technology and social media facilitated the spread of private, embarrassing, or hurtful information. This lesson helps youth understand what boundaries are, why a person might want to set a boundary, and how to know when someone is crossing a boundary. They'll learn how to set a healthy boundary, discuss examples of boundary setting, and put their new assertive communication skills to use by setting boundaries in a role-play activity. The lesson primarily focuses on setting boundaries with peers, but facilitators might also help students discuss setting healthy boundaries with parents or family members.
In Lesson 9, students will continue to practice acting on their values, using assertive communication and boundary setting in response to interpersonal conflict or as a bystander to conflict, and to promote positive digital citizenship. They will consider how external influences such as peer pressure might affect their decision-making. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program, review the STAR decision-making tool and boundary setting, and read the key message for Lesson 9. Then, facilitators will help students discuss external influences on decision-making. After that, students will watch a short video where a character is facing pressure from friends. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 9.1 will conclude with an exit ticket asking students to identify an external influence that might have a negative impact and one that might have a positive impact. Lesson 9.2 will begin with a quick review of external influences and the key message for Lesson 9. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students will read Novella Chapter 9 and discuss any external influences that may have impacted that character's decision. Students will complete the green light, red light activity, where they will identify and discuss positive and negative influences on their decisions. Finally, students will reflect on how assertive communication or boundary setting might help them to respond to external influences. This lesson empowers youth to be themselves, leaning into their personal identity and values to guide their decision-making. We wanted to help youth recognize when their decisions might be influenced by external pressures, for example, peer pressure, a desire for acceptance, or a need for approval or validation. Facilitators can help youth identify when external influences are not aligned to their personal values, practice using assertive communication and boundary setting in response to interpersonal conflict, and consider how they might be a positive influence on others, for example, in responding as a bystander to bullying or practicing positive digital citizenship. A note to facilitators. This lesson includes a video from that'snotcool.com, in which a character is badgered by his friends to send a nude picture to his girlfriend. The video might prompt some blushing and giggles from youth, but it is fairly tame. The characters are depicted as fruit, making punny suggestions. The scenario, however, is important, as it reflects a situation described to us by educators and parents again and again. Requests or demands for personal or explicit images, videos, or texts is something that teens face within their peer groups. Without guidance on how to respond to a situation like this, teens will seek advice from their friends, or they might comply with requests that they're uncomfortable with and not tell anyone. Our hope is that by bringing this discussion into a safe space, we can help teens avoid the advice of banana and pear.
In Lesson 10, students will reflect on what they've learned over the course of the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships program. They will learn how they can use reflection to prepare themselves to approach future difficult decisions in their own lives. First, facilitators welcome students back to the program, review the STAR decision-making tool, and read the key message for Lesson 10. Then, facilitators will lead the Vote with Your Feet activity, where students get up and move around based on a set of statements they might agree or disagree with. After that, students will reflect on a relationship decision they have made and how it impacted their relationship with that person. For those teaching in 30-minute increments, Lesson 10.1 will conclude with an exit ticket. Lesson 10.2 will begin with a quick review of the Reflect step in the STAR decision-making tool and the key message for Lesson 10. Those teaching the entire hour will skip straight to the next activity. Students will read Novella Chapter 10 and reflect on the decisions the characters have made throughout the novella and the impact it has had on their relationships. Finally, students will reflect on what they have learned throughout the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships program. Students will have practiced reflection during each lesson of the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships program, but they've gained a lot of skills along the way. This lesson is a chance to emphasize the importance of the last step of the STAR decision-making tool. Reflection allows us to consider whether we've made decisions aligned with our personal values, whether things worked out the way we'd hoped, and how we might approach a similar situation in the future. Youth work through a reflection activity using a recent real-life decision they made. It is also a good chance to reflect on how youth have grown or changed through the duration of the program. Have their values changed? Have they used any healthy relationship skills that they learned? What skills do they find most and least helpful? Have they seen any impact on their personal relationships?
We strongly recommend that facilitators review the Front Matter package for more information on the program and additional resources. In particular, Appendix D provides some facilitation suggestions to guide facilitators in curriculum delivery and classroom learning and behavior management that fosters a positive environment for learning. We'd like to highlight a select few of those facilitation suggestions here. Maintain fidelity to the curriculum. Curriculum fidelity refers to the faithfulness with which a practitioner implements a curriculum as it is written and designed. To maintain fidelity to a curriculum, a facilitator must implement it without compromising its core components, which are responsible for the program's effectiveness. We discussed the core components of El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships, at the start of this webinar. Facilitators should consider these three elements to maintain fidelity to the curriculum. First, content, or what is being taught in the curriculum. Second, pedagogy, or how that content is being taught. And third, implementation, or the logistics of how the curriculum is implemented, such as teacher-to-student ratio and class size. Facilitators can still maintain fidelity to a curriculum while using knowledge of their students' strengths, needs, and cultural backgrounds to guide their approach to implementation. There is a fidelity monitoring tool available in Appendix F of the Front Matter package. Create an emotionally safe learning environment, sensitive to cultural norms and differences of youth. Take time to listen and observe a participant's verbal and nonverbal communication. It may be helpful to reflect back on what you think the participant is expressing to make sure you really understand his or her point of view. Try to empathize with the participant's experience, worldview, and values. The concept of cultural sensitivity combines both awareness of cultural diversity and an attitude that welcomes cultural differences. Facilitators should be aware of the cultural diversity within their groups of participating youth, including different youth subcultures, ethnic cultures, national origins, religious beliefs, family structures, sexual orientations, etc. A note to facilitators. Sexual orientation does come up as a topic in the novella, and novella characters portray a variety of family dynamics. Facilitators should review all activities in advance and plan how they might respond to student questions or to disrespectful comments if they come up. Empower all youth, especially those from historically marginalized groups. Discussions of how youth present themselves to others and the way that others respond to them can lead to discussions of oppression. Such conversations can be particularly sensitive for students of color and students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning. Facilitators should be prepared to acknowledge the role of racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression when students share their experiences of interacting with others. Facilitators should also consider ways that they can incorporate social justice into these discussions and actively engage in efforts to address issues of power and oppression. Be aware of personal histories. Some youth participants may have experienced maltreatment, been in an abusive relationship, or witnessed or experienced overt acts of racism, homophobia, or other forms of oppression. It is important that facilitators not make assumptions about what youth know or have experienced during their lives. Allow learners the right to pass. There may be valid reasons why the learner feels uncomfortable sharing during a particular activity. Be cognizant that someone in your class may be in an unhealthy relationship. It is more likely than not that someone in your class is a victim and/or perpetrator of bullying, has a history of trauma linked to a personal or familial relationship, or simply has a tenuous relationship with family. Be cognizant of not using judgmental or disparaging language when talking about relationships with peers, parents, or relatives. We don't want to label a person as good or bad, but rather empower youth to navigate difficult relationships in a way that respects others and supports their own well-being. Give youth a positive picture of themselves. Give positive reinforcement whenever possible. Unfortunately, many youth are used to being criticized, talked down to, and underappreciated. Assume the best of the youth with whom you are working. Help the youth to feel a part of the learning process. Let them know the importance of their input and constructive comments, and that you and the youth can learn from one another. Manage emotions, sensitivities, and value differences. When we bring together a group of youth and adults from different backgrounds to talk about sensitive subjects, it is likely that someone is going to push someone else's buttons at some point. Encourage participants to use the oops, ouch method when a participant shares a point of view that has harmful consequences. If a youth is hurt or offended by another participant's comment, they can say ouch. The youth who made the hurtful comment can respond with oops. If helpful, encourage further dialogue by using questions or examples to help the youth who made the hurtful or offensive comment understand why it negatively impacted their peer. However, the burden of challenging harmful opinions does not always have to reside with the facilitator. In some cases, it may be helpful to refer back to previous discussions or activities where definitions were established, consequences of harmful gender norms were identified, etc. Reminding a participant of previous learning may be an effective way to challenge harmful or unhealthy attitudes. Make it clear that bullying and harassment will be addressed to ensure that everyone in the class feels safe and respected. Thank you for joining us for this introductory webinar on the El Camino, the Road to Healthy Relationships curriculum. The curriculum materials are available on childtrends.org for download.